Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the Try to Hit the Ball podcast, where we discuss manhood, we discuss self-acceptance, and much more. I'm here with Jack Jewells, and we're talking just that. So, Jack, thank you for coming on. Um, just let us know a little bit about your story and how you came to be speaking about this subject.
Sorry, this dog is.
Oh, I can't hear the dog. Don't worry.
No, it's because I put myself on mute.
This is a good start. Sorry, this
Okay.
dog.
I think I think we should probably do that one more time. But
Yeah.
when you said this subject, do you mean gender issues?
I mean gender issues because that's
Yeah.
the wider.
Okay.
That's the wider. Sorry, I should have said
Okay.
that's the wider.
I'm really sorry.
Don't worry. That's the wider context of the whole podcast. So,
Yeah.
okay. Let's start again. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the Try to Hit the Ball podcast. I'm Sasha Bailey. I'm here with Jack Jewells, and we're discussing gender, manhood, and self-acceptance, and a lot more. Thanks for coming on, Jack. What kind of led you to talking about this subject?
Yes. Well, thanks so much for having me, Sasha, both as a friend and now interviewee. So, really looking forward to the conversation. What got me interested in it? Well, I'll try and summarize it in a shorter form, but I suppose I was born in Ireland. I live in London, been here quite a long time now, and got involved in friend circles that are very much of the quote unquote queer scene, very quote unquote progressive, and subscribe to a lot of these ideas that we attribute to the name gender ideology, I suppose, as well as the broader wokery on issues such as race and identity politics and class, etc. So I was sort of apolitical before that, and I wasn't as confident making friends. So I was kind of a bit vulnerable to new ideas. And because these people were so assertive and convincing, I sort of went along with it. And on I went, sort of dipping my toes into it. I wouldn't say I was ever too radicalized, but at a place I worked, I got very involved in extracurricular pride activities, and I kind of saw an opportunity to partake in training that was surrounding the gender topic. So I was very much then sort of pursuing that as an additional side thing in a professional context. And one of my motivations for it was I have, what you would consider a normal job, I suppose, but a lot of my friends or acquaintances in this queer circle are more eclectic. Some of them don't have regular work. It's sort of things here and there, but it's sort of labeled as more fashionable, I suppose. So that was kind of a way I felt I was able to converse at all these parties and raves. It's very much like a rave culture sort of era. And yeah, but then as time went on, I started, learning that there was perhaps more to this than met the eye. And there was kind of a series of things that came to light for me. And then I think I felt so compelled to talk about it because I think the primary one was I was a bit disturbed at how someone of, high intellect, such as myself, and someone who's introspective and thinks a lot, thinks quite deeply, could kind of get swept up in something so sort of ridiculous and cult-like, I suppose.
Well,
so
I wanted to ask what you said about it was kind of mixed in with the rave culture. How does that work with the kind of, because you would think that was just going out to raves and having fun. How do those conversations end up being meshed?
Well, all the best conversations happen in the smoking area. I guess you could put it like that. These it's difficult to summarize this because I don't look back on all these times with kind of a cringe-worthy eye roll. I reflect on this era of my life, and so much of it was so much fun. I met lots of really cool people, some of whom I'm still in touch with, some of whom are still sort of that way inclined, and some of whom have sort of gone on similar journeys to me. But one thing people should know about the queer community in big cities such as London, New York, or at least I can speak for London, is it has become extremely political, and you have different pockets of, so-called gay, LGBT, whatever term you're using. So the kind of house music, techno scene in queer is very different to the heaven, Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, Britney Spears kind of bubblegum pop type scene. And that's very different to the circuit gays, they call them, the really kind of mask hench gay men. So there's different subcultures. And I would say the kind of ravey, festival-y queer scene is the most political out of all of them in terms of being, very left-wing, very simplistic ideas about the economy, like just everything is billionaires' fault, and very, very simple ideas, but everyone affirms each other's opinions. So they have a very shallow view on, the Tory party or something. They wouldn't have deep understanding on what really goes on behind the scenes. And then when it comes to issues surrounding race and gender, they very much believe that they're in a system which is set up to make them fail. And, it's a really kind of disempowering scene to be in, because while going to parties is really fun, a lot of these friends of yours are only kind of party friends. And also they all live in a victimhood culture, like a swirling victimhood culture. So you see all these people when they're kind of, at their highest, but then you don't see all the tough times during the week when perhaps they're not even working. And then when everyone's having a good time, they're all just affirming each other's ideas of, the system is literally homophobic, it's out to get you, it's transphobic. So there's a real dark side to that culture, which kind of removes people of their agency to, make their lives great, I suppose.
Do you think that those people who, in your experience from those communities, are people who are kind of working hard and doing a lot? Or do you think they're more you said, during the week, they're not doing a whole lot. Are they the sort of, because if you look at the, even the straight communities and stuff, they're around techno and raves, they're usually not the most professional group of people.
Yeah, it's a funny one. I mean, you'd be surprised. I think in London, when you grow up into adulthood, you learn that all sorts of people party, if you know what I mean. And actually, there's a real kind of bourgeoisie element of snobbishness when it comes to that kind of partying, which lots of people partake in. But in the more kind of grungy queer scene, it's definitely varied. I mean, I've always been a very driven, hardworking, professional person, and so are some of my other friends. And some people, I guess, I know were sort of in between things. Some people were in creative industries in which they're not always in work. But the lifestyle is funny because they kind of model this way of life that goes a bit like, I'm sexually liberated, I'm free from heteronormative social norms, such as marriage, such as having kids, such as buying houses, kind of all the sort of regular life status stages. And because of that, I'm free and I'm not part of the system. But because I'm not part of the system, I'm oppressed because the system is against me. And my lifestyle kind of consists of, smoking weed every single day, partying really hard every single weekend, not doing a whole lot with my week, but then always having an excuse to blame my lack of success and direction in life on the fact that I'm queer and I live in a system that's out to get me.
And do you, I'm guessing I know already, but do you think that there is oppression in that way that is stopping gay people from, or queer people from achieving in today's society, at least in like England?
Yeah, I mean, definitely not to the extent they believe. I think some of these people are just quote unquote queer, but they would otherwise be straight and kind of just a bit strange or a bit of a rebel or whatever you want to call it, going through a rebellious phase. Some of these people are gay. And I think, we always have to acknowledge that discrimination exists at an individual level, at a family level, and sometimes at an institutional level. But I think living in London in particular, the cosmopolitan cities, it's never really a better time to be quote unquote queer, even though I don't use that term. I mean, when it comes to the corporate world, which a lot of people work in here, and other industries is actually in your favor in terms of the affirmative action policies to, actively recruit people who are not straight, white, quote unquote, cis men. So I think at a systemic level, I really don't feel it's the case. And if you do have a situation in which you're discriminated against, I think it's an anomaly. But then I suppose a lot of these people, I'm 30, so a lot of these people still grew up in the 90s, early 2000s with families who didn't accept them. I was bullied in school for being gay. It was not something you talked about. I can't believe that only 15 years ago that was the case. And now, you can't go to school without it being shoved in your face in a picture book about pronouns and sexuality. So I think a lot of people of my generation carry a lot of hurt from that time. And then they use that sort of trauma and stuff they haven't worked through as, it's sort of a weapon to control people and weaponize people's speech, scare people into not saying the right thing. And that kind of went on a tangent there. But
no, it makes sense. No, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I mean, is it so? When you experienced this, you said that you got into it. So you kind of learned about it in order to get into it. It was already something that you noticed existed, this kind of political way of thinking.
Yeah, it was weird because when I started experiencing it from the outside as sort of someone who wasn't as involved in certain group contexts, but sort of, there sometimes, I found it really frustrating and tiresome because I was suddenly kind of being called out for stuff like fat phobia and racial stereotyping in front of a whole group of people while we were just having some drinks, trying to have a good time. So at first I thought it was really frustrating, but I suppose the social costs of not getting on board with it was potentially loneliness and not having friends. And this is something I think is so important to understanding this, because it's easy for someone like me now to look online and see all these gay guys supporting, fetishistic men or trans women in sports or whatever, any of these insane things. And you think, but at this stage, have you not learned all of the objections to it? Like, do you not understand? Surely you've heard it and it makes sense. But I honestly think the power, the will behind not wanting to be excluded from your social network, and for a lot of gay people, their entire social network is LGBT or progressive.
They don't want to learn. Well, I've always thought this, and it's the same with most people. I don't think it's just gay people. Is that if they're scared of listening to people because they're worried they might agree, and if they agree, then what does that mean for them and their social group? Like, they're stuck then, because if they then agree, their mind's been changed and it can't be unchanged. So it's better just not to listen, to pretend everyone's, evil, transphobic. Like, I'm not sure what they think is going on. I think some of them genuinely think there's a bunch of middle-aged women driving around in pickup trucks and lynching trans people now. Like, it's absurd the way that people, the way that people seem to conceptualize it in their mind. And then, so what was kind of your awakening moment to all of this?
Well, there was always this kind of niggling feeling that things were overly simplistic. Like, I remember with some of this gender stuff, I find this embarrassing to talk about, but it's good that I just talk about it with, have you ever seen that kind of diagram, the genderbread person?
Yes. Yeah, I have seen that.
Yeah. So for anyone who's not seen that, I'll explain. So it's basically a way, it's an illustration to elucidate people on, what is gender, what is sexuality. So there's 4 parts to it. There's the skin, which is gender expression. That's how you express your inner sense of gender. There's the heart, which is sexuality. So that's who you're romantically and or physically attracted to. There's the brain, which is your gender identity. So that's your inner sense of your own gender. And then there is the sex parts, I think. Then there's, that's like anatomical sex. I think that's it. Is it?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Identity, expression, sexual orientation, and I think it's then physical. So I remember when I kind of looked at that and, referenced it in this training stuff, I kind of thought, but you can't really refer to gender identity without referring to expression. And I was kind of like, but there really is with the gender identity, there really is this sort of mystical feeling of a blind faith, because it's described in this way of, this is your inner sense of your own gender and this will be unique for everyone and only you know that. So it sounds really personal and really private. So to question it seems kind of taboo.
Yeah.
And I used to kind of, because I'm sort of, I think deeply and stuff, I used to kind of work my way around it sort of and talk my way out of the double standard. And, I would say to people, so today when I refer to kind of various masculine and feminine and neutral things, I'm kind of referring to them in a stereotypical context, so we all understand what I'm saying. But at the end of the session, your own idea of masculinity may change or whatever. So I was kind of trying to work around something that clearly wasn't right. And I think a lot of the situations where I was being called out because of woke stuff were frustrating. My partner, since we met, has always been sort of center-right politically. And I, at first, just didn't care at all because I was sort of apolitical. But then I got a little bit radicalized, and speaking to him about stuff kind of became a bit of a, let's just not go there. And then sometimes I would just not, I wouldn't be willing to hear him out when he tried to describe where he was coming from. And he's not really like me in terms of, I would have been like, right, we're going to sit down tonight and I'm going to explain this to you. Like, he's kind of, he'll kind of leave it be and he kind of let me do my thing. And thankfully we're still together. It didn't impact us too much, but
That's very patient.
I know, yeah, he's a saint for being able to put up with. Like, can you imagine a woke person and a kind of conservative person surviving now 5.5 years later? They're still
it's pretty good. No, I mean, yeah, one person has to be very patient. It's or just kind of easygoing about it. But I think that's actually a funny thing about a lot of the quote unquote conservative types. Is a lot of them just don't actually mind that much what other people believe. It's only when it starts infringing on what they're doing that it starts to become a problem.
Yeah, but also within these queer circles, they just view the idea of conservatism as, really rigid kind of Ned Flanders, nuclear family, people that want to inhibit people rather than retain the great things that have built this nation. And I think they're under the impression that the systems we have, just because it's a system, none of it is good. So there's no credit to the nuclear family. And, you have to remember a lot of these people have kind of troublesome past. So you're going to obviously look for reasons to explain your struggles. But you were asking about what made the pennies drop. So I mentioned a couple of things there, but there were kind of moments here or there that I found frustrating, kind of being part of this. It was very tiring, I guess, being part of these ideas. And then it was when I listened to The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. I was very captured by it. And even though I was kind of passionate about some of these ideas, it was very much just in a social context. So I still loved J.K. Rowling's books. I still read all of them. I never really cared, to be honest. I wasn't like, oh my God, you can't have that book in your house. So on a one-on-one level, I wasn't really like someone who would flip out. But I think what's interesting is I used to not be online at all. I think from 2018, I just deleted social media because I didn't really enjoy it. More of the kind of having a personal social media. So, and I also just wasn't really reading the news or anything like that. I was very much off the grid in that sense. So I had never even heard about the concept of child transition and medicalization. And I hadn't heard the arguments put forward to me about women's safety and stuff. So honestly, all I had to do was hear it once in that podcast, and all I wanted was to know more. I didn't feel threatened. I didn't feel intimidated by the fact that I might be wrong. I was more just very curious because I thought, oh my gosh, maybe I am wrong about this stuff and I need to know more. And I was very, for some reason, captured by the idea. So I think I think that's one thing that maybe is a little bit different for me, is that I wasn't afraid of learning that I'd been wrong and stuff I'd been saying for a few years was wrong, and potentially then the repercussions that would come from that, which obviously I've experienced.
What have those, since the kind of penny drops, and what have those repercussions been? Like, what have you kind of experienced?
Yeah, so I mean, it's the usual as a lot of other people who've been through kind of cancellation type things. So luckily, I've not been through anything crazy. But I suppose when you inevitably decide you're going to broadcast all your feelings online, then there's going to be a certain amount of things that happen. So, you know, it was a few months in, and I went to drama school. That's why I moved to the UK originally. So that was kind of my past life. And, you know, there's a cohort of about 36 people from that year group who are still have a group chat and everything. And I'm close with a couple of people, but otherwise everyone else was just kind of people I would see online a little bit here and there. But we were very close for a few years while we were training, and we were due to have a 10-year reunion in, I think it was January 2024. So this is a while ago now, but and I had said I had RSVP'd to say I was going to go, but then two of them made a WhatsApp chat and added everyone else from the reunion except me in it, and basically said, you know, we're not comfortable being in the same space as him. It was those kind of terminology, like we don't feel safe, like that kind of thing, this bullshit. And then they linked my social media stuff in the chat. And I know this because there are still people who are very much loyal to me and on my side, but some people can't be truthful about that.
Yeah. I find that people can't be honest and open about the fact that they support you, but they'll give you a DM, which is nice.
Well, I mean, when it comes to, so this is the musical theater industry, right? When it comes to that, that is one of the most toxic, politically sensitive, radical industries now you can be in terms of all the diversity stuff that goes into the shows, all the pronoun shit. They become obsessed with trans. When I was training, graduated 2016, we never ever talked about trans ever. Like that just wasn't a thing. And, you know, there were people of different races in my year group. That was never, there was never any sense of racism. Like, but even amongst us all, we would joke about race. We would joke about me being Irish. We would joke about all sorts of stuff that now you just wouldn't dare joke about. And it was fun. I mean, I honestly think that that was a better time. And then fast forward just 2 to 3 years, things have changed so rapidly. So I got canceled from that, and then everyone kind of lynched me in the chat, which now I just find quite funny, to be honest. I would love to know if anyone you know, has changed their mind on some of this stuff since. But again, the social costs are too big. And even having said that, like I wish all of them well, and I hope they're all happy. So that's one example. There's been other people who've come at me in similar ways, saying they're not happy about what I'm doing. I've kind of given them all the arguments as to why I'm doing it, and I think a lot of them, you know, have just disagreed, and then we've drifted. There's some people I've not talked to in a long time, and I guess the toughest thing is family matters, which I can't really go into specifics because I've made that mistake before and it kind of landed me in the shit. So
fair enough.
But I think it's really difficult when people you know closely have an idea of you that you're hateful and, you know, more seriously, racist, transphobe. And, you know, when you care about some people, you obviously don't want them to think of you like that. And this has given me a tough skin, but, you know, I'd be lying if it's not really difficult sometimes. But having said that, I think, you know, while some friends have left my life, I've had so many more people enter it, including you, but lots of amazing people that I've met, loads of gay men who've just reached out to me in DMs that live in London. I've made new friends, people that are really politically open, and people who've kind of had to live in fear amongst their own friend groups and family and stuff because they can't speak. So honestly, there's been so much good come out of that for sure.
Yeah, and so I guess the wider question is where do you think all of this stuff comes from? Why do you think it's an increase in, I guess, the political narrative, but also the just in the prevalence of trans people in general? What do you think has happened? Some people, say social media, other people say it's acceptance. Like, what's your kind of view on it?
$1 million question. Well, I guess in terms of the desire to be another sex, there's a long history of that. And it was far more skewed towards men and their motivations for wanting to be women. So, you're familiar with obviously the Blanchardian typology, which we can obviously go into if you want to, but I guess from a desire point of view, there's that. And then, you can follow the history, that it's all documented in terms of kind of how this phenomenon has grown over the course of the last century. Like, this has taken a long time to really become so mainstream. So, you start with Magnus Hirschfeld, and, various kind of crazy scientists doing bizarre.
Is this in Weimar, Germany, or is this pre that?
Yeah. There's a few of those early stories, and I'll misquote them if I describe them completely, but there's this Christine Jorgensen one. I think that was one of the first that it was just announced in the newspapers that this military veteran guy had become a woman. And then I think Magnus Hirschfeld was the Lily, is it Lily or something? The one that was in The Danish Girl with Eddie Redmayne.
Yeah.
That's what it's portraying basically. And I think he was the first person to, and the last maybe, but to receive an actual womb transplant to try and turn him into a woman, which obviously he then died from the complications. So I think originally there were a very, very small number of men who would by themselves arrive at the spontaneous feeling that they must be the other gender. And their desire was so strong that even though it was not a cultural craze, they still tried to seek out someone who would help them. So while there are probably lots of other men in history who've had similar thoughts, it just wasn't a thing. It wasn't, society had not imbibed the idea that you could change sex. So most people would kind of live with some sort of dissatisfaction, or perhaps they'd get over it after time. Like we don't really know. But then obviously as time has gone on, you have had a movement in academia with postmodernism that has blurred the idea of what sex actually is and intersex conditions. You've then had the pharmaceutical industry, which has capitalized on people's suffering. You had gay people kind of coming out a little bit more, but still suffering a lot of homophobia. So a way that they could kind of navigate that in the middle would be transition, rather than just pretending to be straight people.
So do you think
lots of different things?
Oh, sorry. So do you think that it's the technology or the zeitgeist or both? That's kind of, because you mentioned those other stories, and there are obviously people who fought to seek it out no matter what. So do you think that the availability of the fact that it is now, quote unquote, a possibility is the fact that people are more inclined to move towards it, because then the desire doesn't have to be so strong that, you'll risk transplanting a womb or something crazy like that?
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, with kind of these biopsychosocial phenomena, you can't attribute it down to just people are born this way, or just it's a craze, or just, there's some sort of, during this period, people are afflicted with some sort of specific mental condition that one day won't be a thing anymore. We understand our suffering through the frameworks that are given to us. So there's always going to be really bizarre cases of someone who goes to the doctor and they're like, I'm a giraffe. You have to turn me into a giraffe. There are people now who go to the doctors telling them,
so deadpan.
I think I could be a giraffe. There are people now who desperately want a limb amputated, and it's rare, but people don't entertain the idea, at least in, at a broad institutional level and government level. So it kind of stops some of those, very rare radical people in their tracks, because it's just not possible. But when you make something possible, then there's obviously going to be the early adopters. It's just like kind of a business model, the people who just desperately desired that anyway. And when we talk of the autogynephilic type of trans motivation, which is when a man has a sexual response to the thought of himself as a woman, and sometimes can be led to identifying with an alternate version of themselves as a woman. There's a long history of that through centuries of men who've had that desire. So obviously there would have been a small percentage of them who genuinely would try and seek out, their suffering and obsession was so intense that they would try and seek out someone even just to remove their genitals. It was that crazy. But those examples are so rare. Whereas now, because pharmaceutical companies jumped on it, academia validated all the ideas and marketed it as a civil rights movement. All the LGBT charities took it on board and modeled it as gay 2.0. And then the online craze, and then the wokeification of political correctness. It's all been kind of a concoction. So now there are lots of more people who are suffering, and they're understanding their suffering through this framework that's being given to them. Whereas in the past, that may have not been the case. They may have identified with another disorder, or even, got over it after a little while because.
So you think that, So you think that the idea of it is, because the thing I'm hearing more and more is basically that there is these classical transsexual things, but then there is also just a whole host of other mental conditions which are now being pushed towards transgenderism as well. Is that kind of what you think? It's like it's being misdiagnosed and applied? Because if you think about like the explanation of what gender dysphoria is, body dysmorphia can fall under that, depression could fall under that. There's a lot of different things that could be loosely associated with the same idea. So do you think that it's do you think it's a situation where it's a misdiagnosis, or do you think it's a situation where it's exposing more people who have that, with the AGP thing, you would say that paraphilia?
Yeah, it's tricky because when we talk about diagnosis, it comes with it's implied that there are some people who are really transsexual and gender dysphoric, and there are some people who are fake or not really, or something else. And I don't believe that that's true. I don't believe that there's any true trans. I don't believe that gender dysphoria is as clear as we think. I think there is definitely a host of symptoms that you could attribute to someone being very unhappy about their sex. But sometimes the reasons you're unhappy about your sex is entirely due to societal factors, and the fact that you can't express yourself as a gay man the way you want to, and you can't find a partner. You may not really be dysphoric about your penis. And then you have some people who actually are very dysphoric about their body, and they want nothing more than to have breasts and all this stuff. So it all gets kind of mashed together in this gender dysphoria type thing. But I think when you look at the actual reasons and you drill down, you can actually separate these things, because it's the same thing with these autistic young girls, or isolated, kind of socially awkward young girls. They might vehemently detest their body and their breasts and their period, and they may kind of then begin to idolize what it's like for men. But that's a very different experience to an autogynephile having a sexual response, or a gay man suffering homophobia. But I think the way I describe it is, there's different reasons someone can become unhappy about their sex. For some people, take away all the ideology and let's pretend trans wasn't a thing, there would be some people who would, if they were honest, say, I wish I was a woman, or I wish I was a man. Which would not be very common. But because now it's marketed as, and all the other things I described as kind of a concoction, now you have men who would have otherwise been kind of, a touch autogynephilic, or, perhaps had a bit of that desire, but they wouldn't have ruminated on it this much, because it just wasn't possible, as in, for example, if I was really short and I desperately wanted to be tall, it's just not possible. So I probably would kind of have a fleeting moment here or there. It sucks to be short, but you know, there's only so much I can think about that. Now, if there was some brand new technology that could make people tall, then of course you're going to find some people who are desperate to get that, and then you're going to find people who are 6 foot.
There's those horrible things where they break the bones and people do them, but they're very
Yeah,
extreme, right? Where they grow the section in between in their limbs. Have you seen that? They break
no,
their, oh, it's a thing. They break your femur and then they put a little section of bone and it grows slowly and you gain about 2 or 3 inches.
yeah, that's horrific. This stuff scares me a lot because some people say, "Oh, well, one day it will be possible for a man to have a uterus," and I'm just like, not everything that's possible needs to actually happen.
No, I think it's much, honestly, I think what's much more likely before that is we'll be able to transfer our brain into a different body, because the surgery is quite messy. I think that it's much more likely that we'll get there before we get to where people think we'll get on the other thing. And then it will just become a rich people thing and bodies will just become like, outfits that you wear, and then all this argument will be weird. But that's a few hundred years away at least.
Yeah, I just hope it's one of those things that we say, okay, this is possible, but also no, like kind of stem cell babies and that stuff. I think
Yeah.
there are stuff in that's possible that we don't do. But yeah, I guess in summary of what I was saying, there's different reasons why you could become unhappy about your sex. It could be sexual, it could be due to trauma, it could be part of a political movement. But because the craze now exists and it's sold to people as a framework to solve their ideas, you have people who would have otherwise just not really understood their suffering through that way. Or dealt with a kind of mild dissatisfaction themselves, like we do with other issues, instead of becoming obsessed with this idea that they need to change sex. And like an example is take the RuPaul Drag Race guys. Now, obviously, historically, it's just been they're gay men who do drag, and then some of them get, facial work done, lip filler, all of this stuff, and they're very good at makeup and hair, XYZ. In the past, none of them would be trans, none of them would transition, but now you're seeing lots of these guys, after they do the show, actually start identifying as a trans woman. So my theory is, I don't believe that most of them are probably dysphoric. I think a lot of drag queens have mental struggles from growing up gay and also being part of a really intense party scene that doesn't really prioritize mental health. But, their understanding and experience they're having through the concept of trans and gender identity. So some of them are deciding to transition. Maybe that's giving them access to other men. Maybe that's elevating their social status.
But do you think it's also an attention thing? Like, I can just be this person all the time and I get attention on the show and I got attention on social media. The normal me doesn't get any attention. So is it not better to be this, drag persona 24/7?
Yeah, I think that's definitely it. I mean, if you think about, you mentioned kind of true transsexuals. I think the reason we think of some of the classic transsexuals in that term is because in the past, let's say the 80s, 90s, it would have been so rare for someone to do this to themselves that perhaps it was the most desperate and the people who had thought about it most deeply that would end up doing it. And therefore, perhaps we saw a slightly better set of outcomes, even though when you look at the data, it's actually quite poor. I mean, people like Buck Angel and Blair White are great, and I'm really glad they're happy, and I wouldn't want to take anything away from them. But obviously, they present an ideal of people who are really happy, and I'm not convinced that that's the case for the majority of people. I think a lot of their problems have not gone away.
Yeah.
But sorry, that was just a tangent. What was your original question there?
No, that makes sense. Obviously, we were I was letting you go because it made a lot of sense. But we were talking about okay, so I guess the next question I was going to ask, which follows into what we were saying, was how much of this kind of gender curiosity is normal, though? Because when I was young, every single cartoon I can think of has a gender swap episode. It's just like something that was part of the zeitgeist, be it Futurama, Johnny Bravo, literally all of them. And a lot of people reference those as like trans or not as something that they remember. So how much do you think this kind of gender curiosity or just thinking about it once in a while is normal?
Yeah, I mean, so do you mean a gender swap as if, I wake up and I'm in someone else's body for the
No,
day?
no, just one of the episodes would usually include some sort of gender swap. So Johnny Bravo did it in one episode. Like people reference
Right.
these all the time. It's The Simpsons, I'm sure, has had one. Every kind of
Yeah.
cartoon at some point has had it where the characters swap gender.
Yeah, I mean, I put a clip of The Simpsons in one of my videos where I was talking about autogynephilia because Homer Simpson is looking in the mirror and he's imagining himself having breasts and he's kind of clearly pleased with himself.
Mm,
So yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting point to raise. I think it must be very common for every sex to imagine what would life be like as the
mm.
other sex, because all of us know what it's like to be human, but none of us will ever know what it's like to be the other sex. Um, I don't think it's common for people to think too deeply about what it's like to be, a dog or a dinosaur or something, although you do have some weird sex. But because we all converse with men and women all day, then inevitably you're going to be curious. And also, the majority of people are straight. So
Mm.
therefore, it would be very advantageous for a man to know what it's like to be a woman and vice versa, because then you get to experience kind of more of their mind and how they walk through the world. I think gay men have maybe slightly less of that curiosity if they're not gender dysphoric, quote unquote, because they're attracting the same sex they are. But I think yeah, to me it makes a lot of sense that people would have that curiosity, and you can see there that there's something to be exploited on,
I guess that's it, isn't it? You're taking something that is relatively normal, because in my childhood, all of those cartoons existed, but then you hear trans people reference them as if they were this major moment. And for me, it's honestly just a
yeah.
cartoon I remember. But it's kind of like I feel like it's a normal part of human experience to think about it once in a while, but not to obsess over it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I grew up with all of my close friends being female, as lots of young boys do, who will then grow up to be gay.
Mm.
I didn't really identify with other guys or get on with them as friends. So, it was hard because there would be lots of times when it would be a girls only event or girls only activities, and I would kind of be part of the group, but then sometimes not. So I did used to kind of reflect on, oh, what would it be like if I was just one of them and I didn't have this issue? Now, I never went so far as to like being unhappy with my sex and stuff like that, but it was definitely something I thought about. Yeah.
Mm. And okay, so I guess the next question would be, what do you think there's a right reason for a person to transition?
Yeah. I mean, this thing is really difficult, isn't it? Because I'm always on my show trying to get to the bottom of, but is this ever a good thing? Is
Mm.
there, or is this one day we're just going to look back on it and it will be a crazy medical scandal? So the way I've come to understand it is, we all make choices and some of them are to our bodies, and sometimes we'll be happy with that and sometimes we won't. But is there a medical need to do this to people? I think no. I think you're providing a physical solution to a mental problem, and I think while some people then get lucky and actually have a good life for now, at least, that doesn't mean that they won't get cancer, testicular cancer when they're 50 because they've been taking estrogen their whole life. They may be happy right now, but the truth is there's no scientific data that actually proves that this is a good treatment on average for this population of people, and it's already a vastly different population of people.
Mm.
So I think there's no good basis for it in the medical industry, and if I had to predict, I do believe one day it won't be like a medical offering, at least in public medicine. However, if I hated my nose, I mean, sometimes I do kind of want a nose job, but that's why I thought of it. So if I despised my nose, but it was functional, then a doctor would not provide me a nose job for medical reasons. But if I wanted to go to some sort of cosmetic clinic where they did plastic surgery and pay for it, then I could. And because I wanted a different nose, I might be happy with the outcome, and then I might go on my way. Now, the nose job won't have solved all my problems in life, but maybe it's made me happy about that one thing. So I sort of see it a bit similar to that. There may be some men who love the idea of having breasts and like, ooh, having this thing that kind of is a fake vagina and whatever. And maybe that will make them really pleased for a while, and maybe it won't make them happy forever. But I don't think that there's a medical need for it, considering the data we have on the quality of life afterwards. And I think the problem is that when a lot of people go to transition now, they do it under the auspices that they're both going to like the physical outcome, but also it's going to solve their mental issues and it's going to solve all their life's problems. And that's why, from a medical context, it's just not what's the word? It's not ethical. Yeah. I think, to do it like that. But then when you move that towards a cosmetic process, that's also imperfect, because I also think that there should be really stringent gatekeeping. And one of the gatekeeping methods is therapy, but then therapy is medicinal. And so many people transitioning are at a stage in their life where they're very fucked up mentally. Like, they're going through so much shit. And even with the medical industry having the little gatekeeping it has, there are loads of people slipping through the cracks who have ruined their lives. So if we make it just if you can pay for it, then it's going to be like, sign this consent form. If you regret it, it's your fault. So I don't know.
I feel like the people who are the happiest with the results tend to be people who treated it kind of like cosmetic surgery. Like, we referenced Angel, and he very much says, I'm a woman who's pretending to be a man. But like, people who have that kind of logical mindset about it, they seem to come out of it the happiest. And there's some weird tattoo artists who have done it, and they're very much just, it's a very much physical thing for them. It doesn't seem like they were trying to fix something inside. So it's about presentation, and I feel like those are the, I don't know if it's still the right reason, but I feel similar in that I think cosmetic reasons might be the only real reason. But it has to be but like you said, how would you know if someone's of sound mind to get it done?
Yeah, and I also think that if, like, any situation in which, for example, a man wants breasts and a vagina, he is running away from his sex. He is trying to escape his body.
That bloke who did you see the guy who lost a bet and he's had to have breast implants for the rest of his life now?
I think I might have heard that somewhere, but I've not actually seen any articles on it.
Oh, it's like an old YouTube clip, but it is a thing where he lost a bet, so he had to have boob implants. So there are some people who have it for other reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, right? Because you could say, well, this is just a man who wants cosmetic surgery to have breasts, and he's still a man. And you could say, but why can't we just accept that and then still call them men? But I think the only reason he wants breasts is to escape being male. So I think, yes, people who are probably grounded in their biological reality and see it more as cosmetic, they're more likely to be successful. And if they have, a stable relationship, stable family, kind of good support system, a job. But, Blair White, Book Angel, love them. They're successful. But, it's very clear to me that both of them are running away from their sex. I mean, Blair talks about how, she was abused as a kid, constant homophobic bullying, like the faggy kind of sissy kid. No gay men wanted to date her because she was so feminine. So I think it's difficult, because I don't think anyone would want to alter their body that drastically to mimic the other sex, were they not trying to escape their old sex. Now, maybe there's context in which they can acknowledge, well, I'm still this sex, but this is just something I want for myself, and they might be happy. I mean, there's always going to be statistically people who benefit from kind of anything, if you know what I mean. I don't think it's as simple as saying, oh, well, it's like a placebo, because if you do a study on people, there'll always be like 10%, 20% who just feel better. I don't think you can really say that, because you're altering your body so drastically that it's very obvious you've done something. But yeah, I just see it more as like, this is a type of body modification. You have some people who put tattoos all over their body, get piercing in every single orifice everywhere. And maybe some of those people just think it's funny, or they do it for kicks. Maybe there are some of them who thought all of these piercings are going to solve, because if you pierce every single element of your body, like that must be a coping mechanism for something.
Or you're addicted to the pain, maybe. I don't know. I guess with that, it's difficult because with obsessive cosmetic surgery, it's like a body dysmorphia thing. But with piercings and tattoos, I feel like it might be a pain aspect, because there is and the addiction to the rush, and then you eventually run out of space and you just have your entire body covered in it.
Yeah. And I think the other tricky thing is, it's one thing to get implants or some sort of, facial feminization surgery. There are women who get breast implants, there are women who get plastic surgery, and men. But it's another thing to prescribe cross-sex hormones to someone, because those are drugs. So how can you do that in just a clinical setting in a non-clinical setting without doctors?
I don't think you can. I mean, I worry as well that because it is a new drug that you're introducing to your system, how much of this becomes like an addiction as well to the new thing? Because anything new that's different is going to alter the way you feel, which is going to have a kind of drug response.
Well, I think testosterone in particular is, you can't quit it cold turkey, because you get kind of withdrawal, and it can send women into early menopause. So that is definitely something that is addictive, I think, especially because, I mean, I've seen TikToks of some women, really kind of vulnerable, kind of teenage trans type, who are taking extra testosterone because it's making them feel, really high, kind of, or just really confident. And that's a concern. I think there is some genuine abuse of that stuff going on.
Okay, so we're getting up to the final few questions. What does manhood mean to you? Only the hot button questions here. But no, what does manhood mean to you in general?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because during that queer era, I spent a few years kind of seeing masculinity as a negative thing, and all the ideas of masculinity as a negative thing. So I was kind of unlearning that, but then I realized I let go of a lot of stuff that's actually quite good. So, I mean, there's manhood as in actually being male, I suppose. So that would be the first thing.
being born with the XY chromosomes first. Okay, got it. That's number one.
Yeah. I guess you could attribute to manhood all the kind of unique physiological things you experience going through, like in puberty, what it's like. All boys will remember what it was like when they first started getting erections and stuff like that, and how confusing it was, and when they first started feeling feelings of arousal when they're at 12, 13, how confusing that is, and it's kind of scary for some guys. Obviously, male sexuality and how that works, it's very kind of target orientated. Men can have sex far more flippantly than females, I think, and detach themselves from it easier, which is why you see so many gay men have open relationships and actually function like that. So I think understanding male sexuality and how that's different to female sexuality, and how we respond to stimuli and get turned on, and the different ways we actually fall in love is really interesting. But then I guess in terms of manhood, to me, is kind of, it has a positive connotation. So I'd say it makes me think of kind of the positive notions of masculinity. A lot of them kind of biological, and some of them social, some of them a mix. So stuff like ambition, empire building, status, risk taking, wanting to protect people, wanting to provide, wanting to be strong. I think a lot of what men seek is status, and depending on the environment, the status might be to do with money, or in lefty politics world now, the status is like victimhood. So men will go wherever the status is, and then you obviously have negative types of masculinity too. But I think that's what kind of comes to mind when I think of masculinity and manhood, and I think I'm more in touch with some of those things now. And I think I always come back to these kind of social construct ideas and stuff, because I do think a lot of the stuff I just said is innately biological to men, but it's kind of a normal distribution. So, the majority of men will fall somewhere on that average when it comes to each of those traits. But then not every man will be hungry for status. Not every man will be stoic. But it's just kind of a statistical average thing. And I think that's something we've lost.
But I also think a lot of those things are positive. Like, I think the drive for status can be viewed as something that's actually quite positive, and we've switched it around to be a negative a lot in today's society. But actually, a lot of all of the brilliant things that happened, throughout the 80s and stuff, and the inventions, they all come from men seeking status. The whole video game industry, the stock market, all of these things, they're actually, a lot of people frown on them, but we make movies about them. They're cool. So without them, it's a good answer you've given, because I just feel like focusing on the positive aspects of those things that get negative input is a good thing to do.
Yeah, and it's, it doesn't mean that some women aren't status hungry. There will be some. It's sort of like, it's just less common. But I think what's so bad now is that we're marketing towards men that they have to be more feminine. So they have to not be assertive, otherwise they're aggressive. They have to not be forward, otherwise they're creepy. They have to be really in touch with their emotions, otherwise they're repressed. And then it's the same thing for women. It's like, we need 50% women and men in this exec room. But maybe 50% of, maybe not as many women want to be like badass CEOs where they work 16 hours a day. It's very biologically normal for women in their 30s to desperately want to have kids. And then it's also biologically quite normal for a man to want to provide for his family. And in the context of civilization we have now, sometimes that means go into the office for the whole day. But I guess it's hard to talk about this without people thinking I'm being some sort of tradcon, because I'm totally not. I have an unconventional life. I'm gay, for God's sake. I don't even know if I'll get married or have kids. But I think what would be great is if we talked about these biological facts and then the social pulls that are being enforced on us, and just give people agency to try and discover themselves what is it that I want. Because if I take away all of this Instagram shite and pressure to be a girl boss or to be like beta male or whatever, any of these things, like what do I genuinely want in my life? And sometimes that takes a few years to figure out, but I think I'd love for us to be able to get to a place like that. And just on what you said, history and status, and I do think it's really important to still talk about how women have been put in a situation in the past where they weren't able to vote, they weren't able to work. But to say that this is just because of the patriarchy and men wanting to oppress women, I think is so oversimplified. And if any feminists listen to your podcast, get ready, because I'm going to make you guys really angry. But you have to think about how we came from being cavemen, where like no one really cared about having a career. It was like, get food or die. So then those social roles kind of were formed. And obviously as technology changes and civilization changes, and then suddenly we have, democracy and we can vote, and we, I guess men have been in a more dominant position from an earlier starting point because of having to provide for their family and go out and hunt and like kill people and stuff like that. So I think you can kind of understand that patriarchal history without only framing it in the lens of these men wanted to control women and that's all it was,
Well, I also think we had to keep, if in that frames of the caveman thing, we had to keep women safe, because without them, they couldn't make more people. And if a man goes out and dies, well, another one can probably replace him. But in
Exactly.
a way, you could frame it as we were keeping women safe because they were more precious than men, rather than framing it as men were oppressing women and doing all of the cool work. Like, it's, you can frame it multiple different ways.
Yeah, there's lots of women who would be very angry at you for that. I mean, yeah, like as in, they're obviously, this is the thing, is that for me, it's just about agency and choice, because, and sometimes too much choice it actually makes people really unhappy. But of course, in the past, there would have been many women who actually were relieved to just, be able to focus on their children. And, for God's sake, there were loads of women who were campaigning against them being given the right to vote. Like, as in, these things are not simple. But then, of course, there would have been many women who hated the position they were in, and they had no choice. So I think it's just important that we try and understand what is natural for both our sexes, and then how does that relate to how we see ourselves, and then what is it that we really want? Because hopefully, I think if we were able to get back to that, we would see kind of a return to more people on average seeking out the kind of slightly more traditional family structure, and maybe women being slightly less career hungry and men being able to be in a slightly more assertive position. But hopefully it wouldn't overcorrect and then lead to men dominating over women and women having no agency again. I think it's really tricky, isn't it? So
I think there's a balance, and I think what you said is right. It just needs to be that people have the option to be anything they want, and nothing is demonized and nothing is looked at as better or worse, and everyone kind of has the genuine equal opportunity. If we don't want to force more people into something, we just want people to be people. Okay. Yeah. So the final question is, if you could say one thing to yourself or your younger self, what would it be?
Oh God. I've made so many mistakes in life. There's too many to tell. I think it would be rather than trying to seek out relationships to, find out who you are, find out who you are, and then the right relationships will come, if that makes sense. So I guess my ideas behind that were, I spent a lot of my life kind of trying to conform to groups around me and kind of mimicking how people behave, and sort of that like cliche people pleasing thing, but it was quite conformist. And it was always with this kind of strategic feeling of wanting to have friends and wanting to have a social life and not want to be alone. And it was very unsuccessful in a lot of ways, with kind of more two-dimensional friendships, or things I put a lot of effort into wouldn't materialize at all. And then that made me feel worse. But it wasn't until I stopped caring about that and then worked on myself and realized just how I want to be, that then I started attracting people in my life that just liked me. So I think that's probably what I would say to myself in whatever kind of dumbed down version I'd need to give for a child or whatever I was. So
that's a good question.
And
where can we find you to kind of follow you and stuff?
Yeah, so you're all going to be racing to my YouTube channel after this. Trust me. Search Jack Jewell, Google it, YouTube it. I'm on YouTube. I'm on X, TikTok, Instagram, and I have a Substack as well where I write as well as release kind of member-only videos. So yeah, please reach out if you ever want to chat.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. And I'm just going to recording. How do I do that? I'm always...
Thanks, Sasha.